December 24th, 1935, 11:47 p.m. 14 men descended into the Cotton Club basement like shadows given flesh. They moved with the confidence of those who'd done this before. Professional killers sent by Dutch Schultz to deliver the Christmas message written in blood. The basement was dark except for one light bulb swinging from a frayed cord, casting shadows that danced across damp brick walls. The air smelled of cigar smoke and something metallic, fear, maybe, or the promise of violence. Bumpy Johnson sat at a card table in the center of the room, alone, playing solitaire. He didn't look up when the door opened, didn't flinch when 14 sets of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Just kept laying cards down one by one, red on black, black on red, like he had all the time in the world. Like he wasn't outnumbered 14-1 in a basement with a single exit. The lead man was Tommy the Butcher, Malone. 6'3", 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, with hands that had strangled the life out of more men than he could count. He stepped forward, brass knuckles catching the light from that swinging bulb. Behind him, 13 more killers fanned out in a semicircle. Guns drawn, safeties off. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution. But here's the thing about Bumpy Johnson that Dutch Schultz didn't understand, that most people who underestimated him never lived long enough to figure out. Bumpy didn't play checkers. He played chess, and while Dutch was moving pieces tonight, Bumpy had been positioning his board for 3 weeks. See, Harlem in 1935 wasn't just a neighborhood. It was an empire. And empires don't run on violence alone. They run on respect, intelligence, and the willingness to do what others won't when the moment demands it. Dutch Schultz controlled the Bronx through fear and brutality. He was the kind of man who thought power came from the barrel of a gun, from the number of bodies you could stack, from making people too terrified to say your name without looking over their shoulder. Bumpy Johnson was different. He'd built his empire in Harlem through something Dutch couldn't buy or steal: loyalty. The numbers racket Bumpy controlled wasn't just business, it was hope. People bet nickels and dimes, dreaming of hitting that 3-digit combination that could change everything. And when they won fair. When they lost, Bumpy made sure the money went back into the neighborhood: schools, medical bills, groceries for families who couldn't make rent. In Harlem, Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was a protector, a king without a crown who didn't need one because everyone already knew who ruled. But Dutch Schultz wanted what Bumpy had, wanted the numbers racket, wanted the territory, wanted Harlem itself. And he'd tried everything. Bribes, Bumpy refused them. Threats, Bumpy ignored them. Political pressure, Bumpy had more friends in City Hall than Dutch ever would. So Dutch did what men like him always do when subtlety fails. He sent killers, 14 of the best in his organization, with orders to make Bumpy's death slow and public, a Christmas Eve massacre that would send a message to every independent operator in New York: bow to Dutch Schultz or die. What Dutch didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Bumpy had received word about the hit 3 weeks earlier. A parking attendant named Jerome, who owed Bumpy a favor, spotted Dutch's lieutenant, Vincent Knuckles Romano, meeting with Tommy Malone at a steakhouse in the Bronx. Jerome called it in. 2 days later, one of Bumpy's people inside the Schultz organization, a numbers runner named Mary Coote, he'd been feeding Bumpy information for 6 months, confirmed it: 14 men. Christmas Eve, the Cotton Club basement. They wanted him alone, isolated, trapped. So Bumpy gave them exactly what they wanted. He spread word through Harlem that he'd be at the Cotton Club basement on Christmas Eve, settling some business, made sure the information reached Dutch's informants, sent his own men away, told them to spend Christmas with their families. To anyone watching, it looked like Bumpy had let his guard down, like the king of Harlem had made a fatal mistake. But Bumpy Johnson didn't make mistakes. He made opportunities. The 3 weeks before Christmas Eve, Bumpy moved in silence. He visited an old friend in Brooklyn, a master carpenter named Samuel who owed Bumpy for keeping his son out of prison. Samuel built something special, a section of the basement wall that looked like solid brick but was actually a false front, with a hidden passage leading to an adjacent building's cellar. Next, Bumpy contacted Richard Quick Draw Williams and Marcus Ice Thompson, two of the fastest gunmen in Harlem, men who'd proven their loyalty a dozen times over. He positioned them in that adjacent cellar with clear sightlines through tiny holes drilled in the false wall, invisible, patient, waiting. Then came the cards. Bumpy visited a printer in Lower Manhattan who specialized in custom work, no questions asked. He had the man create a special deck of 52 playing cards, each one printed with a simple message on the back: respect isn't given, it's earned. On Christmas Eve, Bumpy brought that deck to the Cotton Club basement and started his game of solitaire. Each card a small act of psychological warfare. Each shuffle a countdown to something Dutch's men couldn't see coming. Tommy Malone stepped closer to the card table, his shadow swallowing Bumpy's small frame. Up close, you could see the difference between them. Tommy was massive, built like violence incarnated. Bumpy was lean, compact, dressed in a simple gray suit that had seen better days, but his eyes, cold, calculating, completely calm. Those eyes told a different story. Those were the eyes of a man who'd already won. Dutch sends his regards. Tommy's voice was gravel and menace. Says to tell you Harlem's under new management, starting tonight. Bumpy laid down another card, red 7 on black 8. He didn't look up. That right? That's right. Tommy glanced back at his crew. All 14 men had their weapons trained on Bumpy now. He also said to make it hurt, said you needed to understand what happens to niggers who don't know their place. The word hung in the air like poison. Several of Tommy's men shifted uncomfortably. Even killers had lines some of them wouldn't cross, but Tommy Malone had crossed every line years ago and never looked back. Bumpy finally looked up. His face was expressionless, but something in those eyes had changed. Something cold had become colder. Something patient had run out of patience. You know what the problem with Dutch is? Bumpy's voice was conversational, almost friendly. He thinks power is about fear, about how many guns you can point, about how many bodies you can stack. He laid down another card. But real power is about knowing when you've already lost. Tommy laughed. It was an ugly sound, full of cruelty and confidence. I got 14 guns pointed at your head, and you're telling me I lost? I'm telling you that you walked into a room you should've stayed out of. Bumpy stood up slowly, hands visible. No sudden movements. I'm telling you that Dutch Schultz doesn't understand the first thing about Harlem, about loyalty, about what it means when a community decides they're done being pushed around. He picked up the deck of cards, shuffled once. And I'm telling you that only one of you is walking out of this basement tonight. The temperature in the room dropped. You could feel it, that shift, from confidence to uncertainty, from predator to prey. Tommy's hand tightened on his brass knuckles. Behind him, his crew exchanged glances. This wasn't how executions were supposed to go. The victim wasn't supposed to be calm, wasn't supposed to be smiling. You're bluffing. But Tommy's voice had lost some of its certainty. Am I? Bumpy tilted his head toward the walls. You notice anything strange about this basement, Tommy? Tommy looked around. Brick walls, one exit, single light bulb, nothing unusual. Nothing. The wall behind Bumpy exploded. Not literally, but sections of brick swung open like doors, and suddenly Quick Draw Williams and Ice Thompson were there. Shotguns leveled, eyes cold as winter. And they weren't alone. Through those hidden passages came 8 more of Bumpy's people, Men who'd been waiting in silence while Tommy's crew congratulated themselves on an easy kill. Now the numbers were different. Tommy's 14 against Bumpy's 10. Still favorable odds for Tommy, except for one critical detail. Bumpy's people had the element of surprise, superior positioning, and something Tommy's crew didn't have. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their king. Here's what's going to happen. Bumpy's voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade. 13 of you are going to die tonight. 13 bodies for Dutch to bury. 13 families getting telegrams on Christmas morning. He walked toward Tommy, fearless, each step measured. But one of you gets to live. One of you gets to walk back to Dutch and deliver my message. Tommy's hand moved toward his gun. Quick-draw shotgun clicked. Tommy froze. The question, Bumpy continued, now standing directly in front of Tommy, is who gets to be the messenger? Who gets to tell Dutch Schultz that Harlem isn't for sale, isn't for taking, and any man who tries to claim it better come with more than threats and violence? He held up the deck of cards, fanned them out. We're going to play a game. Each of you draws a card. Whoever gets the ace of spades walks free. Everyone else? He shrugged. Well, Dutch should have sent better men. You're insane. But Tommy's voice shook now. The other killers were looking at each other, at the guns pointed at them, at the exits that suddenly seemed very far away. They'd come here to execute one man. Now, they were the ones trapped. Maybe. Bumpy's smile was cold. Or maybe I'm just tired of people thinking Harlem is weak, thinking respect is something you can take instead of earn, thinking that money and guns make you powerful. He thrust the deck toward Tommy. Draw. For a long moment, nothing happened. The basement was silent except for the creak of that swinging light bulb, the rasp of breathing, the hammering of hearts that knew death was close. Then Tommy drew a card, 3 of hearts. His face went white. Next, Bumpy moved to the second man. One by one, they drew. Jack of diamonds, 7 of clubs, Queen of hearts, 5 of spades. Each card that wasn't the ace was another death sentence. Each draw was another man, realizing he'd underestimated Bumpy Johnson, underestimated Harlem, underestimated what happens when you push people who have nothing left to lose. The 10th man drew the ace of spades. His name was Michael Rossi, and he was the youngest of Tommy's crew, 23 years old, 3 months into working for Dutch Schultz, still uncomfortable with the violence, but needing the money to support his mother and kid sister. His hand shook as he stared at the card, black spade against white background, marking him as the survivor, the messenger, the one who'd carry the story of this night. Congratulations, Michael. Bumpy's voice was almost gentle. You get to live. You get to go home to your mother. You get to see your sister grow up. He leaned close, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire basement. But you're going to deliver a message first. You're going to tell Dutch Schultz that Harlem is off limits. You're going to tell him that the numbers racket stays mine, that this neighborhood stays protected, and that any man who comes for what's mine better be prepared to die trying. He pressed the ace of spades into Michael's shaking hand. And you're going to show him this card so he knows I let you live on purpose, so he understands that mercy and power aren't opposites. Sometimes mercy is the most powerful message of all. Michael nodded, unable to speak, tears running down his face. Go. Bumpy stepped back. And don't come back to Harlem ever. Michael ran up the stairs, through the Cotton Club, into the frozen Christmas Eve streets of Manhattan. Behind him, in the basement, 13 men faced their reckoning. What happened next depends on who tells the story. Some say Bumpy's crew executed them all right there. 13 bodies wrapped in canvas and dumped in the East River before dawn. Others say Bumpy gave them a chance to fight, that the basement erupted in gunfire and chaos, and when the smoke cleared, only Bumpy's people walked out. A few whisper that Bumpy let them all go, that the threat was enough, that 13 killers limped back to Dutch, with a new understanding of who they'd tried to kill. But here's what's confirmed. What made the papers, what became legend in Harlem and beyond. On Christmas morning, 1935, Dutch Schultz received a package. Inside was a deck of playing cards, 51 cards to be exact. The ace of spades was missing, and on the back of each card was printed, "Respect isn't given, it's earned." Dutch Schultz never sent men to Harlem again. Within 2 years, he'd be dead himself, shot down in a New York chop house, his empire crumbling. Bumpy Johnson would rule Harlem for decades, building a legend, not just on violence, but on all intelligence, loyalty, and the willingness to make hard choices when the moment demanded. The Cotton Club basement became myth. Old-timers still talk about it, the night 14 killers came for one man and only one left alive. The night Bumpy Johnson taught Dutch Schultz and every other gangster in New York what real power looked like. The night Christmas Eve in Harlem became a reminder that some neighborhoods, some communities, some kings cannot be conquered by force alone. Because here's the lesson. The truth that Bumpy understood and Dutch never did: power without respect is just violence, and violence fades. But respect becomes legend. Respect outlives the men who earned it. Respect writes itself into the history of a place so deeply that decades later, people still tell the stories, still remember the names, still understand that some things, loyalty, community, dignity, are worth fighting for. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. But walk through Harlem today and ask the old-timers about him. They'll tell you about the Christmas Eve when 14 killers came and only one left. They'll tell you about the ace of spades, about respect and power, about a man who protected his neighborhood with intelligence more than guns. They'll tell you that real power isn't about how many people you can kill. It's about how many people are willing to stand with you when death comes knocking. What would you have done? If 14 killers came for you on Christmas Eve, would you have run? Would you have fought? Would you have planned for 3 weeks, turned a trap into a triumph, and sent a message so powerful that your enemies never forgot it? Think about that. Think about what real power means. Think about the difference between fear and respect, between violence and intelligence, between taking what you want and earning what you deserve. And if this story taught you something, if it made you think about power differently, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to understand that intelligence beats force, that patience beats impulsiveness, that respect is the ultimate currency. Subscribe for more stories about the legends who built empires not just through violence, but through strategy, loyalty, and the courage to stand when everyone else said to run. Leave a comment. What's the most strategic move you've ever seen someone make? What's your ace of spades moment? Because this isn't just history. It's a lesson. And the best lessons are the ones written in the blood, sweat, and genius of those who came before us.